Order. Welcome everybody to this special City Planning Committee meeting. We have a quorum of committee members. We have Alderman Briscoe, myself, Councillor Harvey, Councillor Dutta and Councillor Coates. We can co-opt somebody, so Alderman Zuko, are you here in the room?
That's all right.
Alderman Thomas?
Happy to be co-opted. I'll move that we co-opt Alderman Thomas.
Thank you. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against, items carried. Item 2 is indication of pecuniary and conflicts of interest. No conflicts. Item 3, committee acting as a planning authority. 3.1, revisiting 34 Proctors Road, Denern, partial demolition. And you'll note after deferral we got information back to suggest that we have this engineer's report as attached to the agenda, and the recommendation does not change. So I open the item for discussion. Discussion. Or can I have somebody move the
I'll move
item?
the recommendation.
Thank you. No discussion?
I don't think we can stand up here, do we? It is a committee meeting. Yeah.
No, that's all right. Alderman Briscoe.
Look, my feeling is the engineer could have got back. There are three possible engineering solutions. He didn't. He just said, "Oh, I agree with the builder and the owner that chimney had to demolish because it was a safety risk." It seems to me that's not the question that should have been asked. The ask was what engineering solutions is possible to retain or replace or rebuild the chimney. Yeah. So I'm going to support whoever moved the back officer's recommendation.
Moved it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Was that a question for Mr. Noy? Or
Well, it looked like he was going to say something extra, so I'm interested in what he's...
Mr. Noy?
Yeah, well, I think the telling point from the engineer was that he was not consulted for an alternative and can only assume that with the decision to pursue demolition, my services were not required.
That answers, it confirms what I was saying. Yeah, thanks.
Mr. Noy, I raised the other day that like we have these issues that come up about chimneys, and whilst this has obviously got heritage, or has been a response with the initial motion relating to heritage, reason for refusal. Is there any way that we can reconsider that into the future in relation to, I mean, sometimes there are chimneys at the back of buildings that might prevent some sort of modifications, and that's come back to us or come up to us. But is there any way that we can look at that, like revisit that, or how would I go about that?
Yeah, look, there was a question on without notice that we responded to around chimneys. I think late last year on that issue, and recognising that chimneys were an important component of the visible fabric of heritage precincts. But we have in the past allowed for some chimneys to be removed where they're not necessarily visible element from the road. But in this instance, my understanding is that it is felt that it had some significant attribute for the precinct generally. So, but coming back to your question, if it was a strong view that the council felt that chimneys weren't, or those that weren't visible, then we could certainly include something by way of a scheme amendment, or have that considered as a policy position.
Okay. Well, I might consider that as a notice of motion in that case. Yep. All right. Thank you. Any further discussion, Councillor Coates?
Thank you. Just through you, Chair, just a question, just to reorientate myself with this one and get my head around it. But when this application has come through after the chimney was demolished, it got re-advertised, did it not?
Yes, that's correct.
And did we have any representations against?
Not that I'm aware, no.
Look, I guess I sort of made this point when we talked about this at the committee meeting, and I guess I'll just touch on it again. And look, I think the email chain that was provided here by Chris Johnstone, the engineer, I think, look, the tragedy in this case is that the engineer wasn't consulted with in advance, and I think when we heard from the applicant last time, I think they've realised as such sort of after the fact. But I guess, look, normally when a heritage report is done, there is what they're doing it on exists. In this case, it doesn't exist anymore because it was taken down, and yet we still had no representations against. And I think ultimately, with heritage, you'd always want to err on the side of caution, because once it's lost forever. And I think that the heritage consultants here and heritage consultants in general sort of abide by that principle. But in this instance, I think there genuinely was, I can read in this response here, but there genuinely was a concern by the builder in regards to safety. And look, you can argue the circumstances and the applicant, whether or not they've done the wrong thing. But I guess, so in one sense, I can sort of see that box and go tick, but that doesn't necessarily affect the heritage aspect. And we know that the heritage officers are very cautious on that front, because once it's lost forever. But weirdly enough, in this case, we've now got the instance where we actually know if it was concern of the community, because it's been removed. And it wasn't. We didn't have a single representation against. And look, I do note that it is visible from the street. This house will never look the same again. But I think that on heritage grounds, if the application originally was one to remove that chimney, we would have been sitting here and trying to argue, well, is keeping one chimney versus two is, 99% of a house is the same, but we're going to lose this little aspect. And that would have been a debate. And in this case, it didn't happen, because the applicant initially said, I'm happy to keep it. And through, unfortunate circumstances, if I can use that term, we've sort of got ourselves to this situation. But look, I just think this is one of those instances where ultimately discretion exists. And look, I do note that the Heritage Office of Hobart has, done the right thing, and they've erred on the side of caution. And I guess it's up to us to sort of have that little bit of courage. But I'm reading an engineer's report here saying the builder contacted me, saying they've got genuine concerns, and then the engineer backs it up and says, well, yeah, I would too. If the walls are missing and this is happening in construction, yes, that is a genuine safety concern. So, I can completely understand that builders turn around and go on, well, I'm not going to have that on the site that I'm working on, and they've got rid of a safety risk. And look, I'm sure that the applicant is sweating bullets and wishing it could travel back in time and change what's happened, but that's not the world we live in. But it does now bring into question that original sort of heritage application part of it, where we didn't know what the community's response would be if the original application was to remove that chimney, but we sort of do now. And look, I think that ultimately the house, 99% of the look of it's being retained. The other chimney, the more prominent one, is being retained. And I think the heritage of a precinct, although it will miss that slightly visible chimney, is ultimately being retained to a standard that I think fits in within that heritage precinct. And so look, I think in this we've got what is an unfortunate circumstance, but it is a situation where we should be using our discretion. And I think there was a genuine attempt on behalf of this applicant to, with best intention, to go forth and comply with the original application. And we're now dealing with a new one in regards to removal of that chimney. And I think in this situation, it doesn't destroy the heritage. I think that's in some ways proven by the fact we didn't have any representations against. And, I think there clearly is a trail of evidence that we find ourselves in this situation through, ultimately, something that wasn't planned for. So, look, in this case, I think it is an instance where we should be using our discretion. Thanks.
So, do we need an alternative or a foreshadowed motion?
I'm happy to foreshadow a motion.
Well, what is it?
A motion of approval.
Just for approval?
Yeah, and there'll be just the standard initial condition that it's to be consistent with the application. Chair.
Right, thank you. Okay, any further discussion? Alderman Barakis, and I'll note, Alderman Barakis, that Alderman Thomas is
Co-opted in my stead.
Yeah.
And noting that, look, thank you, Chair. I think, look, this is one where I think we need to be careful of the priorities here. And I'm noting that there are heritage considerations, and I would also note once again that when it comes to heritage matters in Hobart, the community tends to be very passionate and very outspoken. In many cases, rightfully so, about issues of cultural importance, and I'll note that there's been zero representations about this, and there are some really significant concerns about the safety of this, and I'd be tending towards agreeing with the applicant here. I think for them to have gone into this in good faith, have put forward something that they have done everything in the right way, and then to have found that it wasn't practicable, it wasn't feasible to retain that chimney in a safe manner without it potentially causing some serious safety risks. Look, to put back upon them to put this back up, I think is borderline unreasonable. So look, I'd be suggesting that there are some there is a huge amount of space here for us to use our discretion. I'd be encouraging all elected members, including those that are co-opted in my stead, to use that discretion wisely, because I think this is one that we should be supporting, and I'd be hoping everybody supports the foreshadowed motion.
Thank you. All right, if there's no further discussion, I'll...
Can I just respond briefly?
We have to stand up.
Oh, sorry, we don't have to stand up. Yeah.
Councillor Harvey, is it relating to the motion in front of us? Yep.
Chair, we've seen this a number of times where chimneys have been demolished against recommendations, and for me, the more you allow it to just happen against the planning regulations, the more it will probably occur when you get off with it every time, because once it's demolished, there's no way of remedying it. And I think we need to go back to the basics of, well, why do people want to demolish their chimneys all the time? That's normally to expand their rooms by knocking walls out, and therefore, the chimney needs to come down as well. So I think, as you mentioned earlier, there's a principle here that, how do you discourage people from wanting to knock down entire walls and just have a chimney, suspended on the roof somehow? But I just don't want to encourage that sort of behaviour when it's against the rules. So I'm happy to support the motion that I've moved for refusal here tonight, because you'll just continue to see this, continue with people knocking down their chimneys and then saying, well, I needed to knock it down. And I'm not challenging or questioning the motivations of the proponent, but it's becoming a bit of a pattern in Hobart. So I'm happy to support the officers in their recommendation.
All right. On that note, I'll put the motion as moved by Councillor Harvey. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? Show of hands. Those in favour?
Briscoe, Councillor Duggar, Councillor Harvey, Deputy Lord Mayor.
Those against?
Alderman Thomas and Councillor Coates.
So that's carried. That motion is